This is a Geek Nerd Podcast's production. All songs, sound effects, and themes are used under fair use copyright.
Follow at geeknerdpod on Twitter to keep up with all of Geek Nerd Podcast's projects, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/geeknerd with tiers starting at $1 a month.
Be sure to check out the Geekly's Facebook page at, you guessed it, facebook.com/thegeekly.
As always, the best support is word of mouth. If you like our shows, subscribe, leave a review, tell your friends, drop us a note on Twitter.
Enjoy the show.
Oh, I didn't check to see how to say this guy's name. Oh well. Okay. So today on Versus we have perhaps our most desperate matchup yet. On one side, we have the 2010 mid-grade flick Repo Men, directed by Miguel Spochnik, who's since mostly just done television, including, interestingly, Altered Carbon and Game of Thrones and Iron Fist. I'm sure he's particularly proud of that last one. Anyway, the film stars Jude Law, Forrest Whitaker, and Liev Schreiber, among some other people. Basically, it is Wikipedia. According to Wikipedia, a man struggles to make regular payments to retain an artificial organ bought on credit from a company called the Union. Now he has to either keep up with payments or risk his life. It only made back $18 million of its $32 million budget and generally received negative reviews from critics. This book came out 1 year after the second film came out, but apparently they have no affiliation. So I'm not saying that anybody plagiarized anything, but that's a little coincidental.
It's kind of interesting because occasionally you'll get, Armageddon, A Deep Impact, Olympus Has Fallen, White House Down, A Bug's Life, Ants, and sometimes these things just happen, but the subject matter in this is so similar.
So similar.
It's shocking, isn't it? You've got to think somebody somehow saw some draft script and thought, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's... They essentially, Repo Men changes a couple names. It's sort of like a Danielle Steele novel, how she just sort of changed places and character names, but essentially it's the same story over and again. Anyway, so the second film we have is 2008's Repo, the Genetic Opera. There's an exclamation mark after Repo, so you have to say it very enthusiastically. Anyway, this film is based on the 2002 musical of the same name. In summary, by the year 2056, an epidemic of organ failures has devastated the planet. The mega corporation GeneCo provides organ transplants on a payment plan. Clients who default on payments are hunted down by Repo Men, skilled assassins contracted by GeneCo to repossess organs, usually killing the clients in the process. Alright, so let's get to our categories. First off, how would you rank the protagonists? So I'm going to say, on the side of Repo Men, this is Remy against Shiloh in the Genetic Opera. So on a scale from 1 to 10, in terms of dimensionality, audience investment, believability, all-around characterness, how would you rank each of them from 1 to 10?
As somebody that's walked... I'll start with Repo Men. As somebody that's walked around attached to a machine for weeks at a time... And I've been someone that's also, at a separate moment, had a device implanted inside me. I found sections of Repo Men horribly relatable. And I found his fear often very real. For instance, I've looked in a mirror and started crying because of this thing I could see implanted inside me. And so I have to be honest, I've got, as you would say, I've got thoughts. I've got things to say about this film, but I was really invested in it. I've got to be honest. From the moment, sort of, I assume this is spoilers because they're quite old, these two things.
Yeah, definitely spoilers.
Yeah, but after his accident and the kind of the immediacy after the accident, I've got to be honest, I was invested in a similar way that I was, invested in Walter White for far too long and saw him as the hero for far too long in Breaking Bad. I found it to be, believable, and I saw things in him that I could really relate to, and it made me kind of freak out because if I was living in America, there's every chance the things that were in me may have actually needed to be kind of ripped out in a kind of slightly less brutal way. But you know, you never know. Never been to America. You hear the stories.
Oh no, they wouldn't have been put in the first place. Like,
Oh, that's fair. That's a fair point, actually. Yeah. Moving on to the genetic opera. Shiloh, like again, she was very much in the centre of kind of a medical story of her own. Found it very relatable too. He wasn't three-dimensional. Nobody's saying that, but she didn't quite have as much going for her as he did. I wasn't quite as invested. And I think that kind of comes down to the point where she's only kind of in 50% of the film, maybe 60% of the film. They're kind of bobbed and weaved about a little bit. So for him, I've gone for kind of 8 out of 10, and for her, I've kind of gone for 7 out of 10. So he nicks it, but I enjoyed both portrayals in different ways. I just wish she'd been in more of it, really.
I'm actually really interested to see how it lines up as we kind of go along, because like I know which one is going to win for me, but like I really have no idea which one's going to win for you. So yeah, this is going to be interesting.
Lex, I tell you something, this is a race to the bottom today.
Oh,
so yeah, there is a clear winner, but for it's for the wooden spoon rather than the gold medal.
I think in general, all the things about Repo Men just kept me very detached from it. I didn't really feel that Remy was overly even two-dimensional. Like the people around him had like wants and needs and motivations and stuff, but he was just kind of meh. He's just sort of there, you know, like his wife wanted him to go into sales. He just kind of ambivalent about it, but, you know, she wanted it, so he was going to do it. His best friend wanted him to stay doing the repo stuff, and he wasn't, like, super thrilled about that, but he was also kind of like, yeah, have fun with my friend. You know, like, he was, like, super opposed to having this thing, like, put into him, so much so that, like, he was pulling the cords out that were keeping him alive. And then he's all of a sudden he's like, yeah, sure, all right, stick it in. The whole fascination with the singer, and then like one that was just like weird because he's supposed to be like devoted to his wife, but then he's got this weird fantasy going with this singer that he's never actually met. And okay, you know, everybody has kind of like their unattainable crushes of like, oh yeah, you know, I'm really into that person or whatever. You know, the sort of fantasy infatuation. But then he finds her, and they kind of go on the run together, and this very sort of unlikely thing, and he just kind of seemed to be for whoever he was with at the time. Like he didn't actually have his own identity. He was just, you know, like when he was with his wife, he was the husband. When he was with his friend, he was the friend. When he was with the singer, he was, you know, like this revolutionary running from the man. It didn't work out for me. So I put him at 4.5. Shiloh, on the other hand, I mean, obviously, yeah, she's not a perfect character, and I will not claim that any of the characters in the genetic opera are perfect characters. It definitely has its flaws, but I felt overall she had a more distinct personality and motivations than Remy did. And, like, the points where she wavered, you could understand why she was wavering, you know, like, towards the end when she finds out that her father has done all of these horrible things to her for her entire life, and she actually had no idea what her history really was. And she kind of has this sort of torn moment between Roddy and her father, but in the end, you know, she sides with her father and realizes that Roddy's kind of a shit human being. I just found her overall more relatable, even though she's like a 17-year-old girl. Like, she was very much a 17-year-old girl throughout, like maybe at some points potentially more mature than the average 17-year-old, but you know, she still had that kind of naivety and innocence and gullibility, but also this kind of like strength and independence. And so yeah, I gave her an 8.
Yeah, I think my issue was Shiloh, and it wasn't her fault at all, because everything we got that was about Shiloh I found compelling. But the fact that she wasn't in enough of it felt to me as if a lot of her growth as a character was kind of happening off screen, and that kind of, required us to kind of make leaps on her behalf. But yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think the guy in Repo Men, he was like a blunt instrument. It's like giving the Hound from Game of Thrones his own TV show. They are the instrument that you send off to kind of do the dirty work. They're not that compelling. So yeah, this was difficult for me, a bit of a coin toss.
Okay, moving on to our next category. I mean, I suppose yeah, that's a draw really because you barely went with Rami and I went with Shiloh, so like half a point for each of them so far. This will be interesting. Okay, so the next question. With both films being roughly 10 years old, which one, in your opinion, has aged better?
This is difficult because I would really like to tie this into the aesthetic question. So I'm going to try and do this without kind of giving away the game on the aesthetic answer. For Repo Men, simply, it looks exactly like you'd expect that kind of film to look. Dated, but recent dated. If it was made today, they wouldn't change a single thing about it, but it would just have been shot in, 4K or something like that. It looks like Fight Club, it looks like Equilibrium, it looks like exactly when it's come from. The genetic opera, I love the look, absolutely love the look. And that is one of the main selling points of the genetic opera. And they have made very specific stylistic choices, which are, truly something to behold. It's a visual spectacle and an auditory spectacle as well. But doing that means that you really kind of hammer your flag into this particular look. And at the time, that's great. But on the budget that I assume they're operating with as well, you have to think about the budget. I think you kind of pay the price slightly later on. And that price is that at this point in time, it feels dated to me. Don't get me wrong, like I love the aesthetic, but I'm going, by the question that you've posed. And I think I think the genetic opera, so I think Repo Men has aged better because it just looks like any other film from the period. With the genetic opera, it was made in the same year that Ed Norton's MCU Hulk film came out, and yet it looks like it's kind of from the mid to late 90s at best. So I would have to say that I think Repo Men has aged better. But talk to me again when we do the aesthetic question, because I'll have kind of opposite views. So it's complicated.
It is complicated, and I think my answer may bleed slightly into the aesthetic or not. But for me, I would say it's probably a draw on this one, though I think given more time, Repo Men will become more obviously dated because the genetic opera has this kind of like post-apocalyptic grunge feel that is kind of more or less timeless, while Repo Men is much more explicit about showing us their tech. And eventually, and probably not too far off, reality is going to catch up and surpass this tech, and it's going to appear very dated. Or, at the very least, we will get similar sort of things, and the reality versus what's in the show or what's in the film will, like, one will look very clunky next to the other one. So I just think that, like, yeah, I think the genetic opera could have happened in any time, whereas Repo Men felt very much like a contemporary film that, in another 10 or 20 years, it's just going to look very old. So, yeah, I guess, again, we have another draw, and they're both still even. So 1 point for each. So far when we've done this, there has been like a clear winner from the beginning, and it's been just like a clean sweep across every category. So this is a little bit more interesting. Okay, category 3. Which film has more rewatchability / memorability / impact? Or in other words, which one is going to stick with you more?
The honest answer is neither. This is a photo finish for not first place, but kind of for last place. I've gone again for Repo Men, and I've gone for only one specific reason, and that was the ending. Literally nothing in the rest of that film stuck with me, and I've mostly forgotten Repo already. The thing that stuck with me about the ending was the fact that I think I must have missed some foreshadowing somewhere along, but the noise when Jude Law's skull was hit by that chain, I just thought to myself, No, like there was this big crack, and the whole way through the film, I was so skeptical. But the ending is the only thing of the two things that's kind of stuck with me. I absolutely love the narrator in the genetic opera, but I remember the genetic opera mostly from Nothing But Scantily Clad Women. I think it's kind of close to Blood Machines and its use of women, different but not as bad, but kind of close. Sexy nurses, one was gutted for fun. Sexy bodyguards in fishnets. Women giving blowjobs, and the most unnecessary kind of breast exposure in film history, I think, in that final scene. I just feel like neither will stick with me. In a week's time, I will have forgotten both. But just that moment where, he's sat on the beach and suddenly the guy disappears, and you realise that he actually died in that moment. Barely registered, but it's the of the two properties. If I'm being totally impartial and totally honest, that was like, oh shit, okay, I must have missed the part where they said that you could put people in like a simulation or something. But if I had to score these out of 10 Lex, it would be a 0.0 and a 0.1 in favour of Repo Men. So I'm just giving you my truth, and that's my honest opinion on the two of them.
I will give you that the ending of Repo Men will probably stick with me forever as the stupidest ending to a film I have ever seen. For me, in terms of rewatchability, it is a very narrow margin. In general, I'm not a fan of musicals. They always do this thing where they force dialogue into a song and it doesn't fit, and I don't know how that, like, I don't know why they do that, and I also don't know how the composers aren't just like, oh no, that sounds awful. Like if I think it sounds awful, then surely people whose like job is in music could be like, yeah, that's the rhythm is off here. But it happens in every single musical, so I don't know. So yeah, there are some cringy moments to the opera. There are definitely cringy characters as well, and as you mentioned, the scantily clad women is very unnecessary. But overall, the genetic opera still gets my vote because Repo Men is just way too dumb to waste my time on again. Okay, so this is the one you like. Rate the overall aesthetic on a scale of 1 to 10.
I'll start with Repo Men, and for me, this is like just any other bog standard near future dystopian city. You think of Blade Runner, you think of Altered Carbon. Altered Carbon had the kind of neon going for it, which was nice. This city could have been called, Neo, insert, city location here. It was dirty, it was smoggy. There's this idea that I've started looking at since I watched Altered Carbon, where the rich have built the buildings even taller so that they kind of go through the clouds to literally, elevate themselves even further away from, the slums and the poor. And we kind of see both sides of that in this as well. But it was just generic. There's no escaping that this is just, they could have filmed 5 separate films here. There's nothing about it that is unique to this kind of body of work whatsoever. Just another grey American city. On the other hand, you got the genetic opera, and it looked absolutely delightful. As I've said, I don't believe it's aged particularly well, but it looks straight out of a Frank Miller graphic novel, a Tim Burton film. Really gorgeous to look at. Evoked Sin City for me. Evoked The Crow, Batman Returns. Even I don't know the song, but one of the Backstreet Boys videos. It just made me I think it's the one where they're all like dressed as like mummies or something like that. I had like a really strong whiff of that as I was watching this, because half the time I was expecting the narrator, again the absolute star of the show, to kind of burst into that kind of song with like backing singers at one point. So I've gone for Repo Men, 5 out of 10, just generic. And I've gone for 8 out of 10 for the genetic opera, and it just my favourite bit about the genetic opera was the aesthetic, so a deserved win for me in that category.
For me, this is no question. Repo, the genetic opera's aesthetic is like 100% up my alley. Like I grew up with, Michael Keaton's Batman, all of the Tim Burton films, The Crow. I mean, God knows how many times I've watched The Crow. I could probably like quote the dialogue at you. It's trending on Twitter today, by the way, which I was like, oh my god, the crow's trending. Anyway, yeah, so like you said, Repo Men is just this kind of like generic 21st century sci-fi, while like the opera has this like very grunge goth and like totally over the top aesthetic to it, and I mean, like, really, like, who doesn't love that a little bit? So yeah, I would go kind of say like 8 out of 10 for the genetic opera. Maybe like, well, I'll be generous and give it 5 out of 10, because it is just like, it's not bad, but it is fairly average and unoriginal. So finally we have a winner out of one category. So the genetic opera has now crept ahead. Okay, so the last category, which one of the two, in terms of technical ability, audience enjoyment, all of the various factors, has a better plot from beginning to end?
Sorry. Again, I'm just kind of thinking about how much I really didn't enjoy watching either of these things.
Okay. Come on, like, Repo had some great songs, like the surgery one. I love that song. Surgery,
yeah, I like that one, but it had one about the terms and conditions and the contract, and so for me they just equaled each other out as a bit of a wash. Okay, let's start with Repo Men. It's a wholly familiar plot. Person in position of power, normally some kind of lawman or lawwoman, rebels against their programming, and everything they've ever known, is proven to be a lie. They go on a journey of self-discovery, rebellion, and normally what happens is they very literally bring down the quote-unquote corporation. This can lead to, actual buildings being brought down or somebody being, like, shot in the head, that kind of thing. Although familiar, it happens to be one of my favourite narrative structures, funnily enough. And Repo Men, he's blowing up everybody's had all these, new organs, and he's blown up the kind of the list or whatever, and so nobody will now have to kind of repay them. Equilibrium, it's like 1984, they can't feel, they have to take these pills. I think at the end he blows up all the pills so people can feel again. You got a Fight Club where everyone's credit card debt is literally exploded with all these buildings. It's not unique, but it's just happens to be a plot that I particularly enjoy. Fight Club and Equilibrium are far better examples of this narrative structure for anybody interested. Genetic opera, Lex. So what you're trying to tell me is there was a plot in this. I'm guessing it was like the Succession plot. It seemed to be the main one, but there seemed to be quite a few, like, trying to get their head above the parapet. A few plots kind of competing. I didn't feel that all the separate narratives, they didn't really complement each other well. There didn't seem to be as much fluency and cohesion between them. But I would argue very strongly that the plot is not the point of this film whatsoever. The point was to create a highly stylized rock opera, which they absolutely succeeded in doing. There were catchy songs. It's not like, I'm going to be singing these songs or remembering them like some from, Hamilton or, Wicked or something like that. But that it succeeded so much in the aesthetic and the sound. But I've got to be honest, I just think the plot was very much a secondary thought. And again, if you'd asked me to do this out of 10, I'd be giving the genetic opera like a 1, and I'd be giving Repo Men like 2. This is not a high quality battle in my eyes, but I've got to go for a narrative structure that I'm familiar with and I enjoy. And this they didn't do it any justice whatsoever. But it's by a hair. I'm going for Repo Men, and I've found all 5 of these categories incredibly difficult. But yeah, I've ended up going for Repo Men. So yeah.
Well, like, I will grant you, like, neither plot is particularly original. On the one side you have the whole, like, jealous friend resenting his buddy's, like, other interests and not wanting things to change and kind of doing really shitty things to keep things from changing, and it, like, yeah, that whole thing. On the other hand, you have, like, the story of a tortured, overprotective father with a child, in this case a daughter, who's coming of age, and he doesn't want to actually let her grow up, tied in with, you know, the kind of scorned, vindictive lover who wants to like punish, who hasn't obviously like moved on from that. So yeah, both are very tropey. Both kind of play into cliches a bit. I think the difference though is that Repo leans into that tropiness. Like it's very camp and kitschy, and it doesn't actually take itself too seriously, while Repo Men still believes it's saying something valid and important about society as a whole. Like the genetic opera doesn't pretend to do that. It's you know, like you said, it's kind of a spectacle. You know, it's about the aesthetic, it's about the music. There is a plot there, but it is kind of very loose. It's not explored a whole bunch. But yeah, they don't really pretend to be, you know, serious or meaningful. Repo Man is also very dumb. Like, okay, I get what they were trying to do with it, but they just like fumbled the whole last quarter. Like up to the point he got his head bashed in. Like I said, it wasn't too bad, but you know, after that point, it just I don't even know what to say about it. So yeah, I felt that the opera was fairly consistent throughout. You know, some of the characters were over the top, like I mentioned, and you know, a few of them weren't even really relevant, but there was some decent depth to kind of the main trio of Wallace, Roddy, and Shiloh. And you know, it didn't have a nicely tied up ending, as you know, anyone who listens to any of our podcasts will know I really enjoy. So we don't really know what's going to become of Shiloh now that she's out in the world and on her own. We don't know what's going to happen with Gene Co. I mean, we know that like Roddy's kids have sort of taken over, but none of them are particularly competent. So who knows what's going to happen with that? So yeah, for me, it's got to be Repo, just because, basically for the sake of consistency. You know, from beginning to end, it kind of held the same line, whereas I felt that Repo Men was like pretty steady up to a certain point, and then it just fell off a cliff.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're saying about leaning in with Repo. It kind of leaned into the madness, but that, for me, just kind of made it feel quite melodramatic. And I think, as I said again, I just feel like the level of acting and the level of storytelling, I get that there is a consistency, but the kind of what I would describe as kind of the bouncing around between, it never felt like I had one plot. Maybe a lot of plots that were meant to fit together but lacked cohesion. And so that's where the inconsistency comes in for me. The kind of bouncing around between things that felt quite ill-fitting. But, you know, I enjoyed the spectacle. But yeah, the plot was, yeah, not the point, I think, is what I'll say about that.
Tallying up the scores, it is very close between these two films, but the overall winner is Repo the Genetic Opera with 3 versus Repo Men with only 2.
If I could give our audience something to take away, I would say just please never watch these films. Please just find something better to watch. I didn't care for them. Yeah, is that too harsh?
I think it's definitely too harsh. I mean, like Repo Man, okay, yeah, don't watch it. I remember when it came out, I was so excited for it. You know, I was still in my phase where I was like absolutely smitten with Jude Law and like the whole concept. Like, I mean, you know, repossession of organs, like that's a kind of goth kid's dream film, right? And then I saw it and I was just like, well, that sucked. Kind of like how I felt about Suicide Squad. You know, when you go in like really, really wanting to love something, and it doesn't matter how hard you try, just you can't.
That's one thing I could have done with a bit more of in the Repo, the Genetic Opera, a bit more of Anthony Head kind of out on the job, because I quite enjoyed those scenes of him actually kind of like Batman, having somebody come swinging up by their ankles and then kind of actually seeing him work. But there wasn't enough of that. Give us some Jude Law films you like.
Okay, well, obviously the talented Mr. Ripley. I very much, what was it? AI?
With Haley Joel Osment?
Yeah, I really enjoyed his character in that. It was kind of different than like what he usually does. What else? Oh, there was he was in something with Anthony. Well, there was Closer, which I really enjoyed. I actually read the script for that as part of my undergrad, and then like the film came out, and I was like, oh wow, that's super cool.
He was in Captain Marvel.
He was in Captain Marvel. He makes a great villain. Like, I really love him as a villain. I think, like, when he was younger, he could pull off the kind of jovial, bumbling, kind of, I don't know. He was better when he was younger at being the kind of hero, but as he's gotten older, he's much better at being a villain. He's a very good villain. Although I do enjoy him as Dr. Watson. I think he does very good with that, and I like the two of them together. I think they yeah. Oh, Alfie was the one that I was trying to remember. Again, like, it's a weird film. I don't know why I like the film, but I think I just like Jude Law in it. Also, just like two kind of very, very old ones, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which I don't know if you've seen that, but
I don't think I have seen that, actually.
You know, coming from Savannah, like, I know the whole plot inside and out, and if I never have to talk about it again, it would be awesome. But he played Billy Hanson in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and then he was also in Gattaca with Ethan Hawke, which I also used to love. I mean, I think I still love Ethan Hawke. If he's in something, I will watch it, but I meant the film Gattaca. Like, I quite liked it.
Okay, now tell me your favourite Paris Hilton films.
What is it?
House of Wax is the only one I can think
of. Because she dies in the first 15 minutes. Yeah, I always find it really interesting when she appears in films, like, as an actress. Like, did she get hired for the novelty of Paris Hilton? Like did the casting director see, like, oh, people are going to see Paris Hilton in this and just, like, crack up laughing? And does she realize that? Or does she think she's a serious actress and that these are, like, real jobs?
I think in the case of House of Wax, people thought, who do people want to see die? And that was what it all came down to. Let's give her an agonising death that people can kind of fantasize and fetish about. Yeah,
she actually won a raspberry for the Genetic Opera.
Did she? Interesting.
And I can't remember if it was this or something else that she got Worst Actress for.
Might have been on Pornhub.
Might have been. I mean, who knows? Okay, so next month we are doing What We Do in the Shadows, the film, versus What We Do in the Shadows, the television show. I mean, I'm pretty sure where I'm going to fall down on this one, but, you know, we're going to do it anyway. So that is August's versus. We did Repo Men versus Repo the Genetic Opera. A little bit out of our wheelhouse, I guess.
I think we're all right. I think you've made some good choices, actually.
I always make good choices.
You do.
Yeah. All right. See you guys.
See ya.